The paper plate bent in my lap, flimsy under the weight of ham and potatoes. Across the table, my daughter's smile was thin, rehearsed. "You don't need the china anymore," she said, as if I hadn't set that table for 40 years. The good dishes stayed locked in the cabinet, my hands stayed folded, my throat stayed tight. I swallowed cardboard food off cardboard plate while she whispered about selling the house. 2 weeks later, I slid foreclosure papers across her granite countertop, steady as crystal. "Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from?" Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. The morning light slanted through the tall windows of the dining room, striking Helen Duvall's silver candlesticks like small fires. She stood at the end of the long walnut table, folding the final embroidered napkin with care only she and perhaps God still understood. The linen was starched, snowy, pressed to military corners. The floral center arrangement was trimmed precisely, white hydrangeas and tulips with a hint of blue delphinium, just like her mother once arranged. Easter at the Duvall house wasn't just tradition, it was declaration. She stepped back to admire the gleaming place settings, gold-rimmed china passed down 4 generations, real crystal goblets sparkling like breath held in glass. Everything said, "We remember how to do things properly here." The front door opened without a knock. Candace's voice floated in, high and airy. "Mom? Wow, you went all out." Helen turned, smoothing the invisible wrinkle from her blouse. "Of course I did. It's Easter." Candace swept into the dining room like she was hosting a home segment on cable. Perfect waves in her hair, mauve wrap dress cinched too fashionably tight, and that small, smug smirk she wore like foundation. "Oh, Mom," she laughed, lifting a stack of pastel paper plates from a reusable grocery bag. "You don't need the china." Helen blinked. "Excuse me?" Candace set the paper plates on the sideboard beside the heirloom silver and handed one to Helen like she was offering a truce. "They're biodegradable," she added. "Trevor picked them out." As if summoned, Trevor Wills walked in, his sunglasses still perched on his head like he couldn't quite commit to being indoors. He scanned the room and let out a low chuckle. "We're keeping it casual now," he said, flashing the grin that probably worked better on clients than mothers-in-law. Helen's fingers tightened around the rim of her china teacup. Porcelain strained with a quiet, cracking sound. She forced her voice into its finest silk. "This isn't a barbecue," she said. Candace gave her that tone, half daughter, half HR manager. "Mom, no one cares about fine dining anymore. It's stuffy." "It's tradition," Helen said. "It's clutter," Trevor added, already crossing the room. He plucked a fork from the formal setting and held it up like a relic. Do people even know which fork goes where anymore? "I do," Helen said, sharper than intended. She took the paper plate from Candace's hand and set it down, firmly, without anger, but with finality. There was a pause, thin and cold as the wind tapping the stained glass window in the hallway. Then Candace turned with exaggerated lightness. "We're just trying to make it easier on you. No cleanup, less stress. You always get overwhelmed." Helen didn't answer. Not yet. She watched them head into the kitchen, whispering, laughing once. Her eyes followed them until they vanished behind the swinging door. The room was quiet again. Only the faint sound of Nora's wind chimes drifted from next door. Helen's phone buzzed. She pulled it from her apron pocket. "Nora B., want to meet for coffee tomorrow?" Helen stared at the message. Her thumb hovered above the reply button, but she didn't type anything. Instead, she walked slowly around the table, righting a knife Candace had bumped askew. Her reflection wavered in the polished surface of the soup spoon. Older, yes, but steady, intentional. She picked up one of the paper plates from the sideboard and held it up to the light. It was flimsy, with a pastel bunny in the corner. Trevor's idea of holiday hospitality. Her hand lowered, her chin lifted. She carried the plate to the kitchen, quietly opened the trash bin, and placed it in without a sound. As she stepped back into the dining room, the air seemed to shift, like something inside her had quietly clicked into place. Then, another buzz. A new message lit up the screen. Grayson Bell. "Call me Monday. We may need to talk about the deed." Helen's breath paused, just for a moment. She looked again at the glittering table, the family history lined up fork by fork. Her thumb finally moved. She typed one word back to Nora. Yes. The dishwasher hummed low behind the kitchen door, but the house itself was too quiet. The kind of quiet that pressed in behind your ears and made every floorboard seem to creak with purpose. Helen moved slowly, her heels clicking faintly against the waxed hardwood floors. Easter had come and gone. The guests were gone. The laughter had been forced. The leftovers covered and tucked away like regrets. She paused in the entry hall, gazing up at the staircase banister her husband had refinished by hand the year after Candace was born. He used to joke it had more coats of varnish than their marriage had anniversaries. The polish still held. A soft electronic beep echoed from the parlor. Helen turned her head, frown tightening. Another beep, followed by the faint click of metal on plaster. She stepped to the doorway and stopped cold. Trevor stood in the center of the parlor with a laser measuring tool, sweeping it slowly across the walls. A yellow tape measure trailed from his pocket, unspooling onto the antique rug. He didn't notice her at first. He was too busy muttering numbers into the voice memo on his phone. 10-foot clearance here. Load bearing? Maybe. Could brace with steel beam? He pivoted, saw her in the doorway, and grinned like nothing was strange about his presence or his survey. Hey, Helen, just getting a feel for the space, potential. Her voice came out so level, it startled even her. Potential for what? Trevor gestured toward the crown molding. Open it up, modernize a little. This room could breathe with the right touch. Think sleek lines, maybe bifold doors to the patio. She stared at him. The parlor had hosted her bridal shower, her late husband's wake, her grandson's first Christmas. The idea of bifold anything slicing through it felt like surgery without anesthesia. Candace breezed in behind him, holding her phone, scrolling. Oh, there you are. Trevor had this idea. We could knock out the wall between this and the study. Let in some light. Make it all one big entertaining space. We? Helen asked, voice dipping low. Candace didn't catch the tone. It'd be so clean. Minimalist. I saved a few inspo shots. She turned her phone around. Bright photos of sterile, white-on-white interiors. Not a stitch of history in any frame. Helen's gaze moved to the wall between the rooms. Behind it sat her father's bookcase, her husband's desk, her wedding portrait. It's not a blank slate, she said. It's a home. Candace gave a small, practiced smile, the kind that hid its teeth. And we want to preserve that feeling. Just elevate it. Helen said nothing. Candace and Trevor exchanged glances, misreading her silence as consent. Anyway, Trevor said, pocketing the laser tool, we'll sketch a few ideas. No pressure. You'll love the vision once it's laid out. They walked off toward the kitchen, already absorbed in their phones again. Helen stood there a while longer. The parlor felt suddenly fragile, like someone had opened the windows too wide and let the cold pour in. Later, after they'd left, smiling, promising to circle back next weekend, she returned to the kitchen to make tea. That's when she saw it. A cocktail napkin lay on the marble counter, scribbled with pencil lines and annotations, walls labeled with X's, arrows pointing to places where doors didn't exist yet. One corner had a note in Trevor's handwriting, expand to include formal dining? If she'll give it up. She stared at it, didn't touch it, didn't tear it. Instead, she folded it once, then again, then slid it into the drawer with the tea towels. A record. The doorbell rang. It was Nora, wind-chapped and holding a tin of lemon shortbread. I brought the good ones, she said. You look like you need them. Helen managed a smile. Thin, not brittle. Nora's eyes scanned her face, then drifted past her shoulder, taking in the unusually quiet house. What happened? Helen didn't answer right away. She reached over, took the cookies, set them gently on the counter next to the napkin drawer. They don't see a home, she said softly. They see a floor plan. Nora didn't respond. She didn't need to. She just reached over, set a hand on Helen's and squeezed once. Then she said, Let's go find that bourbon I left in your pantry. The bourbon sat untouched between them. Nora had tried. She'd poured 2 glasses, left them breathing on coasters shaped like old southern mansions, but Helen hadn't taken a sip. She was somewhere else, Further back, further in. Night had wrapped around the house like wool. Nora had eventually gone home, leaving behind her half-empty glass and a quick hug that said more than words could. Now Helen stood in the study, her fingers ghosting over the brass handles of the roll-top desk. She hadn't opened it in years. The top bore the weight of time, framed family photos, a porcelain clock that hadn't ticked since 2016, and a stack of sympathy cards still bound with a silver ribbon. She rolled the top back slowly. The scent hit first, old cedar, ink, and something dry and papery that smelled like memories pressed between dictionary pages. She opened the center drawer. It stuck halfway, jammed with rubber bands and expired checkbooks. But it wasn't the middle drawer she wanted. She knelt, reached to the bottom left, the one with the lock. The brass key was still hidden in the hollow leg of the desk chair. Her husband's idea. He'd loved secrets. She slipped it into the lock, turned once. It clicked open. Inside were papers sorted into neat manila folders, a will, an old life insurance policy, a typed inventory of the house's contents dated April 2005. She pulled them out one by one until she found the envelope marked Deed 2009 Update. Helen opened it with hands that no longer felt steady. The paper was yellowing, but the ink was crisp. Her husband's signature was there, then hers below it. And beneath theirs, an unfamiliar clause typed in sharp legal font. Survivorship title granted to Helen and Candace Duvall, joint tenancy. The words slid through her like a knife. She remembered the meeting vaguely, some quick process at Grayson's office, something done after James passed. Probate ease, the clerk had called it. Just a formality. Nothing would change. But something had changed. On paper, the house was no longer hers alone. She sat back on her heels, the folder slipping from her hands. The silence of the study was suddenly unbearable. The hum of the refrigerator in the next room sounded like a faraway warning bell. Her fingers found her phone on the side table. She scrolled to Grayson Bell and pressed call. It rang twice. Then, "Helen," he answered, not a question, just a name, warm and careful. "You all right?" She didn't say hello. "I just read the deed." A pause. Paper rustling on his end. She could picture him there, in his corner office, glasses halfway down his nose, the same tie he'd worn to James's funeral still hanging on his coat rack like a flag of old allegiances. "Survivorship clause?" he asked gently. "Yes, my name and hers. Joint." He exhaled through his nose, quiet but not surprised. "That was added when James passed. You'd asked us to make sure the estate didn't go through probate. It's common." Helen swallowed. Her mouth felt like it was filled with dust. "I didn't understand it meant this." "Well," he said, slower now, "it's reversible. But you'll need to act quickly, before she tries to move forward with anything major. A partition action could challenge the current ownership structure." Helen stared at the envelope in her lap. She could still see her husband's signature, steady and bold. "Can you do it?" "I can," Grayson said. "But Helen, this won't stay quiet for long. Once we file, she'll know." She looked toward the doorway, as if Candace might be standing there. But of course she wasn't. Only the hallway beyond, lined with wedding photos and oil portraits of ancestors Candace barely remembered. "Then we'll be quick," she said. "I'll come in Monday." "Good," Grayson said. "Bring the original if you can." Helen hung up, then slowly stood. Her knees ached. The ache grounded her. In the dining room, she lit the tall taper candles still nestled in the crystal holders. The gold-rimmed china sat clean, untouched, shimmering in the candlelight like it belonged to a world that wasn't gone yet. She sat at the head of the table, the deed envelope in her lap. Outside, the wind was picking up. Inside, she no longer felt small. Then, her phone buzzed once. "Trevor Wills, sent you a doc to sign. Just something small for the mortgage." Helen didn't open it. She just stared at the screen, jaw tightening. Helen was in the garden room when she heard the laughter. It wasn't the kind you welcomed. It was the kind that echoed in your own home like it didn't belong to you anymore. She set her pruning shears down on the windowsill, wiped her hands on her apron, and walked slowly toward the foyer. Her footsteps were deliberate. No one was supposed to be here. The front door was wide open. Candace's voice floated in from the east wing. "Oh, this is the part I really want to open up." Then a male voice, unfamiliar and booming, "Easy fix. Demo this wing. Pull the old lathe out, reframe. Honestly, could be sexy as hell with an all-glass side edition." Helen stepped through the archway into the sitting room and stopped short. A man in khakis and a tight-fitting polo stood where her mother's harp used to sit. He held a clipboard in one hand and an iPad in the other. His boots were dusty. He didn't look up when she entered. Trevor was mid-laugh, gesturing toward a load-bearing beam. "We could push the structural line back 4 feet, maybe add a pocket door." Candace turned then, bright as a debutante, pretending she hadn't just invited someone into her mother's home without so much as a text. "Mom, you're up early." Helen took them all in at once. The contractor, the clipboard, Trevor's rolled-up sleeves, Candace's smugness wrapped in concern. "No one rang the bell," Helen said. "We didn't want to wake you," Trevor said, without irony. The contractor finally looked up, nodding casually. "You must be the homeowner. I'm Doug, just taking some measurements for a rough concept." Helen's voice was calm, almost too calm. "There won't be any concept, Doug. Please leave." Trevor raised a hand, like he was soothing a child. "Helen, it's no pressure, just ideas." Helen didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed on Doug, flat and sharp. "I said please leave." The contractor hesitated, then glanced at Trevor. "Now," Helen said. Doug gave a shrug, the kind men give when they think you're being unreasonable, and headed out the door without another word. Silence bloomed in his wake. Candace stepped forward. "Mom, that was my house," Helen said. Candace blinked. "It's our house." Helen didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "You showed up uninvited, with a stranger, and no notice. That's not co-owning. That's trespassing." Trevor opened his mouth, but Helen cut him off. "Don't bother. I saw your message. The document you wanted me to sign? I didn't open it. And I won't." Candace flushed. "You're overreacting." "Number I'm correcting." Helen turned and walked to the side table in the foyer where her phone sat next to a bowl of antique keys. She picked it up, dialed, and waited. "Grayson Bell," came the familiar voice on the other end. "It's Helen." "Morning. Everything okay?" She looked at Trevor and Candace standing like confused tourists in the home they thought they'd someday inherit, gutted and gleaming. "I want her name off it now." There was a pause. Then Grayson's voice shifted into gear. "Understood. I can fast-track the petition. I'll need you in the office by 10 tomorrow morning." "I'll be there." She ended the call, then set the phone down. Candace stepped forward again, more cautious this time. "Mom, this is all so sudden. Why are you—" "Because you brought a contractor into my house without asking. Because you sketched out demolition plans while I was serving Easter ham. Because you stood in my parlor and talked about gutting it like it was rotting meat." Trevor scoffed. "It's just design." Helen's expression didn't change. "It's just betrayal." They didn't speak after that. She walked to the door, held it open. Trevor stepped out first. Candace lingered, face unreadable. Helen said nothing. The door clicked shut behind them. A moment later, her phone buzzed again. "Nora Bright. Vintage finds in Harrodsburg. You still want that silver chest? She's holding it for you." Helen stared at the message. Then, without hesitation, she replied, "Yes, tell her not to sell it to anyone else. It's mine." The morning was overcast, the sky a dull pewter that matched Helen's coat. She parked in front of Grayson Bell's law office, a dignified red brick building with black shutters and a brass plaque by the door, the kind of place that whispered power without needing to shout. She took the steps slowly, breathing in once before pushing open the heavy oak door. Grayson looked up from behind his desk as she entered, rising with quiet formality. "Helen," he said, voice warm but efficient. "Come in. Let's get this moving." His office hadn't changed in 20 years. Same shelves of law books no one read anymore, same faint smell of leather and lemon polish. But this morning, it felt different. It felt like a war room. She sat. He handed her the folder, already open to the signature page. "This begins the partition action," he said. You'll petition the court to remove her as a co-owner based on misuse and abuse of joint ownership. It won't be instant, but it puts us in motion. It also sends a signal." Helen didn't flinch. She picked up the pen, smoothed the paper flat, and signed her name with the precision of someone carving stone. Grayson nodded. "We'll file by end of day." She didn't linger. There was no need for small talk. Outside, the wind had picked up. The chill bit through her wool sleeves as she walked back to the car, but her grip on the wheel was steady. The inside of First Kentucky Bank smelled like old carpeting and fresh coffee. The lobby was quiet. Only one man filling out a deposit slip, whistling off-key. "Miss Helen," came a bright voice from behind the glass. Missy Sharp, teller since the Reagan administration and lifelong gatherer of small-town secrets, waved her over. "Didn't expect to see you in here today." Helen offered a polite smile. "I need to ask about financing options, quietly." Missy leaned in. "We do quiet real well around here." They moved to one of the small glass offices off the lobby. Helen explained the situation, not every detail, just enough. Joint ownership, potential buyout, bridge loan. Missy nodded along, her pen tapping the edge of her keyboard. "You've got the equity, no question. If it comes to it, we can get you pre-approved fast. You'd be in control of the home again." Helen breathed out. Not relief exactly, but resolve. "And everything stays frozen under that name until this clears?" she asked. "Locked tighter than a vault," Missy said. "Candace can't pull anything cute unless she wants federal charges." Helen stood. "That's all I needed. Thank you." "Always, hun," Missy said, smiling. "And you let me know if you need character statements. I've got years of 'em." Nora insisted they meet for lunch, and Helen didn't resist. They chose a cozy French cafe tucked beside a bridal boutique downtown. The air smelled like melted cheese and espresso. Helen hadn't eaten there since James passed. Nora wore her signature silk scarf and a lipstick the color of revenge. "Did you sign it?" she asked, skipping pleasantries. "I did," Helen said. "Grayson's filing today." Nora raised her glass of cheap champagne. "To swift legal fury and finally reclaiming your house." Helen tapped her glass against Nora's. "To no more uninvited contractors." They both laughed. It was brief, but it was real. Nora leaned in. "And if it comes to court, you know I'll testify. I've seen how she talks to you." Helen gave a small smile. "Let's hope it doesn't get that far." Their laughter was interrupted by the buzz of Helen's phone on the linen napkin. Grayson Bell. "Call me immediately." She excused herself from the table and stepped outside, where the wind had turned colder. She answered. "Grayson?" His voice was tight. "Trevor just filed for a home equity loan." Helen froze. "He can't. He's not on the deed. He used the joint ownership documents, what Candace legally holds. We'd frozen that window, but he filed before the injunction hit the registry. The paperwork's already been submitted to underwriting." Helen's hand went numb. She pressed the phone harder against her ear. "So what does that mean?" "It means," Grayson said, "he's trying to leverage the house as collateral. If it goes through, you won't just be fighting for the deed, you'll be fighting for closure." Helen stared across the street at the pristine rows of wedding dresses in the boutique window. "Let me guess," she said flatly. "He didn't come up with that on his own." "No," Grayson said. "He didn't." Helen didn't wait. She turned on her heel and marched back through the cafe, past Nora still seated at their table, a question already forming on her lips. "I'll explain later," Helen said, not breaking stride. Back at First Kentucky Bank, the automatic doors whooshed open like breath sucked between teeth. The fluorescent lights overhead seemed harsher now, slicing across the linoleum. Helen's heels clicked fast against the floor. Missy Sharp was mid-conversation with an elderly couple when she caught Helen's eye. Her cheerful expression faltered. "Helen!" she called, brows rising. "I need a word," Helen said, voice even but hard. Missy excused herself and ushered Helen into the same small office from earlier. As soon as the glass door clicked shut, Helen placed both hands on the table. "Trevor filed for a home equity loan." Missy's mouth opened, then closed. She turned to her computer and started typing, fingers suddenly stiff. "He submitted it yesterday," Helen continued, "using Candace's co-ownership status." Missy was already navigating through internal forms, her jaw tightening. We flagged the deed and all related activity. That freeze should have blocked anything new. Helen said nothing. She just waited. Missy clicked, scrolled, then let out a breath. Okay, he applied, but nothing's gone to approval. It's sitting in underwriting. That means it's not funded. Yet. And it won't be, Helen said, each syllable carefully unshaken. Missy nodded. I'll escalate it now. It'll hit legal review. We can deny based on fraud if Grayson gives us the paperwork in time. Helen's throat tightened with something sour and rising. He knew how to use the documents. That wasn't guessing. No, Missy said flatly. It wasn't. Helen reached into her purse, pulled out the deed envelope, and laid it beside the keyboard. I want it on file, she said. I want everything traceable. Missy didn't argue. By the time Helen returned home, the sky was bruising to a soft lavender. She didn't go inside right away. She stood at the end of the long gravel drive and looked up at the house. It stood like it always had, proud, worn, full of memory. But something inside it was shifting. Something inside her was. When she stepped through the front door, the silence met her like a loyal dog, still, waiting. She walked to the study, set her bag down, and opened her laptop. A few clicks later, she was staring at Trevor's LinkedIn page. It was performative and puffed up, luxury visionary, home experience curator, property optimization strategist. Helen's eyes narrowed. She opened a second tab, typed his name with court records, then added small claims, then contractor complaint, then liens. By the time the sun dipped fully behind the trees, she had a page of results, 6 unresolved disputes, 3 state filings, 2 failed LLCs, 1 Better Business Bureau suspension. She printed everything, page after page. When the final sheet slid into the tray, she gathered the stack, tapped it straight on the desk, and slid it into a fresh manila folder. With deliberate strokes, she wrote on the tab, Wills, Fraud History. Then she walked to the hallway closet, reached up into the cedar shelf, and pulled down a padded storage box. The antique china, wrapped, labeled, cataloged. She carried it carefully to the upstairs guest room, the one Candace had always complained was too stuffy, and stored the entire box in the armoire behind a panel that only clicked open if you knew how to press it. It wasn't hiding. It was safeguarding. Downstairs, the dining room still smelled faintly of lavender polish and lemon oil. She ran her fingers across the polished table once more, then turned off the lights. That night, as Helen settled into bed, her phone lit up. Nora Bright. Check your email. You'll want a drink. Helen reached for her reading glasses, clicked into her inbox. One subject line glared back at her. Trevor Wills. Lawsuit pending. Maryland Contractor Board. She opened it. At the bottom was a note in Nora's voice, plain and sharp. He's done this before. Only this time he chose the wrong house. Helen heard the tires on gravel before the knock ever came. The morning sun had barely lifted over the sycamores lining the driveway, but Candace's white SUV was already parked crooked across the stones, its back window dotted with boutique shopping bags. Helen opened the door before the bell rang. Candace stood there in oversized sunglasses, clutching her handbag like it was armor. You've been avoiding me. Helen stepped back just enough to let her in, number I've been prioritizing. Candace walked in without waiting for more, her heels clipping the hardwood, past the foyer, into the sitting room, like she still believed this was a house she belonged in. You're being dramatic, she said, spinning to face Helen. All of this, lawyers, banks, freezing accounts. Trevor and I are invested in the future of this place. Helen closed the door. Invested? She repeated, tone bone dry. Candace nodded, brushing an imaginary thread from her sleeve. Yes, we've spent time, thought, planning. We want to make this home livable for the next chapter, for our chapter. Helen didn't move from the threshold. I built the past. I own the present. Candace scoffed, the veneer cracking. I grew up here too. Exactly, Helen said. You grew up, then you left. And now you show up with a contractor and a boyfriend and talk about gutting rooms you don't understand. He's my fiancé, Candace snapped, and we're not trying to erase anything. We're trying to update it, make it relevant. To whom? Helen asked, walking calmly toward her. Trevor's clients? His portfolio? Your Instagram feed? Candace flinched like she'd been struck. Helen stopped a few feet away. Her voice dropped low, but it held steel. Do you even know what that house means to me? Or what you were doing when you let him apply for a loan on it like it was some cheap flip? I didn't. Candace's voice cracked. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Helen tilted her head. Then why did it? Candace's lower lip trembled. She dropped her bag onto the armchair and sat beside it, hands folded tightly in her lap. I thought it was ours. I thought you wanted to pass it down to me someday. Her voice broke. I thought we were on the same side. Helen watched her. The silence stretched. Then, carefully, she walked to the fireplace mantel and ran one finger across the edge, collecting a fine trace of dust. She didn't look back at her daughter when she said, Nothing's ever been yours that you didn't demand. Candace inhaled like she'd been slapped. Helen turned slowly. This house wasn't a gift. You treated it like one. Like you were entitled to it. Tears welled in Candace's eyes. I was trying to plan a future. You were plotting a takeover. Candace stood, unsteady now. You don't have to be cruel. No, Helen said quietly, but I do have to be clear. The room held its breath. Then, Helen's phone buzzed. She stepped away and checked the screen. Nora Bright. You seeing this? For sale sign just went up at the McAllister place. Helen tapped the photo. A white sign staked into the frozen lawn 2 blocks down. Bold red letters, for sale, prime lot, investors welcome. She looked up slowly at Candace. The timeline suddenly clicked into place. The location, the proximity, and the kind of future Trevor had been investing in. Tell me the truth, Helen said. Was this whole thing just a starter home for you, until you could tear down someone else's too? Candace didn't answer. She didn't have to. Helen didn't sleep that night. She sat at the kitchen table long after the lights were off, nursing black coffee that had long gone cold. The quiet around her was no longer comforting. It felt like the kind that came before storms. By morning, her steps were slow, deliberate. The house creaked more than usual, as if echoing her unease. She pulled on her cardigan, the one with the elbow patches James used to tease her about, and opened the front door to retrieve the day's mail. The cold hit her hard. Bitter, late-winter Kentucky cold, the kind that bit through bone. A thin layer of frost clung to the mailbox. Inside was the usual: a restoration hardware catalog, a utility bill, a glossy local real estate flyer promising unlimited investment potential, and one unmarked manila envelope. There was no return address, no postmark, just her name, Helen Duvall, in blocky Sharpie handwriting. She didn't open it. Not right away. She set the rest of the mail on the hall table and carried the envelope into the study. Her fingertips trembled slightly as she slid a letter opener through the top fold. Inside was a single sheet of printer paper, folded once. She unfolded it, then froze. In the center was a fake eviction notice, written in bold red Comic Sans, the kind you'd find from some novelty legal pad at a joke shop. Notice to vacate. Due to modernization and future expansion needs, occupant is hereby advised to vacate the premises before renovation commences. At the bottom, scrawled in black ink like a punchline, future residents of Candace plus Trevor. Helen stood there, the paper fluttering faintly in her hand, her mouth pressed into a hard line. The back of the sheet was worse. Drawings, crude sketches of her home with annotations. Pool here? Demo this wing. Home gym off back porch. She didn't sit. She didn't crumple it. She walked it to the kitchen, laid it flat on the counter, and snapped a photo. Then she texted Nora. He left me mail. Joke eviction notice. Their names on it. Future residents. The reply came in under a minute. Nora Bright. He's not just arrogant. He's dangerous. Helen didn't answer. She picked up her phone again and called Grayson. He answered instantly. Helen? I got a notice, she said, voice clipped. Joke format. No return address, no stamp. It was in my mailbox this morning. Grayson's tone turned cold. Do you still have it? Yes, and a photo. Good. Keep both. I'll start emergency injunction paperwork. This just became harassment. Helen nodded to no one. I want to lock it all down. Accounts, lines of credit, access, everything. I'll coordinate with the bank, he said. Send me the photo, and I'll fast-track the restraining clause. She hung up and immediately sent the image. Then she opened her laptop, logged into every financial platform she had, banking, investment, brokerage, and systematically revoked every shared permission. Every contingency she'd left in place for Candace after James died, gone. She changed passwords, updated two-factor verification. It was like sweeping broken glass from a floor you used to trust. By afternoon, she had the locksmiths booked, 2 of them. They arrived in twin work vans, men in Navy uniforms who didn't ask questions when she handed them a printed list. Every exterior entry, deadbolts, reinforced if possible, Helen said. The younger of the 2 raised a brow. You expecting trouble, ma'am? I'm expecting dignity, Helen replied. They nodded. By the time they finished, the sun was melting behind a bruised sky. The new locks gleamed in the fading light. Fresh metal, a boundary restored. She paid in cash. That night, she sat at the top of the stairs, looking down at her locked front door. The house was sealed, quiet, still hers. Then her phone buzzed again. It was Nora Bright. Just drove past Candace's car, parked outside the McAllister place again, lights on inside. Trevor was with her. Helen stared at the screen. Her hand moved slowly, back to the manila envelope on the counter. She picked it up, folded it precisely, and slid it into the folder labeled Wills, Fraud History. Right beside the court filings, the BBB reports, and the stack of contractor complaints. And then she added a new post-it on the inside flap. They think they've already moved in. Helen's tires skidded slightly as she pulled into the First Kentucky Bank lot, gravel spitting from beneath the wheels. She didn't bother to straighten her parking. The motor was still running when she grabbed her handbag and marched through the doors. Missy Sharp looked up from her desk and went pale. "Helen? Tell me it's blocked," Helen said, voice clipped and low. Missy pushed her chair back and stood. "Come with me." Inside the glass office, Missy shut the door behind them and pulled up the account dashboard. It's frozen. Every single linked transaction. The last attempt was from an out-of-state IP tied to Trevor's business account. Helen's stomach sank. What was he trying to access? Missy didn't sugarcoat it. A transfer, $25,000, scheduled to hit a design escrow service this Friday. Helen exhaled through her nose, sharp and short. And Candace? Missy shook her head. Her name triggered internal review. It's flagged for legal. Helen stared at the monitor. There was something sterile about the way the numbers sat on the screen, as if none of it were real. But it was real. These weren't missteps. They were calculated moves. She stepped out into the cold light of the lobby and called Grayson from the parking lot. He picked up on the first ring. "I just saw the freeze notice come through." Trevor tried to move $25,000, Helen said, through Candace's name. "Then we're done with warnings," Grayson said, steel under his usually smooth tone. "That's identity fraud, Helen. If she gave him permission, or worse, access, they're both exposed." Helen stopped walking. The wind whipped her coat open, but she didn't notice. Her eyes blurred against the bare branches of the tree line across the street. "I can still see her," she murmured. "Candace, 5 years old, playing tea party under the dining room table. She thought the linen napkins were magic." "Helen," Grayson started, gentle now. She used to tuck them into her collar and pretend she was royalty. "Helen," Grayson said again, firmer this time, "that little girl doesn't exist anymore." Later that afternoon, Nora arrived uninvited, which meant Helen opened the door before she even knocked. "Got your message," Nora said, holding out a thermos of strong black tea like it was ammunition. "How bad?" Helen stepped aside. "They tried to move money, through the bank, under Candace's name." Nora didn't blink. "Then it's time." Helen's mouth tightened. "She's my daughter." "No," Nora said sharply. "She was. That girl, the one who used to sing show tunes in your living room and ask for second helpings of your peach cobbler. She's not the one signing off on renovation loans behind your back. That girl's gone." Helen didn't argue. She just walked to the porch and stood beside the 2 rocking chairs that had sat untouched all spring. She used to rock Candace here on summer nights after thunderstorms. used to hold her close when she'd cry at the sound of wind against the shutters. And now? Now. Helen stood still, her fists tight at her sides, as her phone buzzed in her pocket. She already knew who it was. Candace Duval. If we can't have the house, no one can. Helen stared at the message. Not a threat. Not even a bluff. Just a statement. Just a line drawn. Her hand closed around the phone like she could crush it. Grayson's call came 2 hours later. Helen was in the kitchen with a pad of paper, sketching out a new security plan with Nora when it rang. She answered on speaker. "I just got off the phone with the county clerk's office," Grayson said. "You're going to want to sit down." Helen didn't. "Tell me." "There's a second mortgage application filed," he said. "It's in process. It has your name and signature on it." "That's impossible," Helen said flatly. "I thought so too," Grayson replied, "until I pulled the form." There was a pause, then the rustle of papers over the line. "It's forged, Helen. The handwriting isn't even close, but unless we stop it in the next 48 hours, they'll assume it's valid." The kitchen went dead silent. Nora's face turned white. Grayson's voice dropped to a near whisper. "He forged your name. They're trying to bury you in debt in your own house." The next morning broke cold and windless. Helen didn't make coffee. She didn't toast bread. She didn't water the ivy in the kitchen windowsill like she usually did. Instead, she walked to her desk, opened the folder marked Wills, Fraud History, slid out the forged mortgage application Grayson had couriered over at sunrise, and stared at the signature. It was laughable. Slanted, blocky, careless. Her name, but not her hand. She tucked the pages into a hard-shell portfolio and locked the clasp. By 9:15 a.m., Grayson was standing beside her in the front office of the Fayette County Clerk. His tie was crooked, rare for him, and his jaw was tight. "We've got enough to file a criminal complaint," he said. "Forgery, wire fraud, intent to defraud an elder." Helen didn't blink. "Do it." The clerk on duty took the folder, brows lifting as she flipped through the notarized affidavits and Grayson's formal report. "You'll want to follow up with the sheriff's department. They'll initiate the investigation once we register this." Grayson nodded. "Already called." By noon, Helen was sitting in an interview room that smelled faintly of copier toner and someone else's regret. The sheriff's deputy across from her was kind-eyed and methodical. He took her through the process step by step. "Can you confirm that this is not your signature?" he asked, pointing. "I can confirm," Helen replied. "It's amateur and insulting." He didn't smile, but he wrote that down. It took nearly 40 minutes. Signatures, statements, a brief on how the mortgage application had slipped in before the freeze Grayson filed could take effect. When it was over, the deputy stood and offered her a water bottle. She declined. Outside the interview room, Nora was waiting with a travel mug of tea and a small brown bakery bag in her lap. "Lemon cookies," she said. "You look like you'd need something that bites back." Helen accepted both, but only sipped the tea. Her hands were too steady to eat. They didn't go home. They went straight to the courthouse. The restraining order paperwork was long, detailed, and soul-stripping, but Helen filled it out without hesitation. Every sentence was proof. Every paragraph, a wall built between her and the version of her daughter who had let this happen. The woman behind the desk stamped the form with a satisfying thunk. "A judge will review it by tomorrow morning. If it's approved, it becomes enforceable by noon." Helen nodded once. "That'll be fine." She stepped back outside and breathed in the winter air like it was fresh paint sealing everything shut. That evening, she stood in the kitchen, slicing a lemon for Nora's tea when headlights swept across the front of the house. They paused, then lingered. Helen turned off the burner and stepped to the front window. The white SUV idled on the street, the engine purring like a threat. Candace was behind the wheel, alone. Her sunglasses were off, her jaw clenched as she stared directly at the window, daring her mother to come out. She didn't honk, didn't call, didn't even text. She just stared. Helen didn't flinch. She flipped the switch that turned on the porch light, bright, steady, unmistakable, and let it cast a clean circle of warmth around the locked door. Then she walked back into the kitchen. "Was it her?" Nora called from the other room. "Yes," Helen said, calmly setting the lemon slices onto a saucer. "She's not getting out." "Well, that's something," Nora muttered. She used to barge in without knocking. Helen opened the silverware drawer and paused. The sound of the SUV engine grew distant. It didn't turn around. It just kept driving. Later that night, just as Helen was climbing into bed, her phone buzzed. Grayson Bell. They traced the IP on the mortgage app. It wasn't just a forgery, Helen. It was filed from Trevor's design firm server. That gives us intent and jurisdiction. Helen stared at the screen, then tapped reply. Move forward. I want it on record. Every lie, every cent. Grayson responded 1 minute later. You'll have it, and they'll never touch this house again. The letter came certified. Helen signed for it with a pen that trembled slightly in her hand and carried it back into the house without opening it. She didn't have to. She already knew. It was Grayson who confirmed it that morning on speakerphone, his voice unusually somber. The foreclosure notice isn't final, he said, but it's real. The lender moved forward based on the second mortgage's pending status before the fraud flag hit. Helen sat at the breakfast nook, one hand wrapped around her mug, the other flat on the table like she needed to anchor herself to the earth. So they believe I mortgaged my own home into foreclosure? They don't believe anything yet, Grayson said. They see documents. What matters is proving those documents were lies. And we're doing that. The process is slow, but it's winnable. Helen stared out the window. The grass was still frostbitten. The rocking chairs on the porch hadn't moved in days. And the bank? She asked. Already alerted. They've flagged the file. You're on record as a fraud victim. The title is locked until the case clears. Still, Helen said softly, it's my name on the letter. Grayson was quiet for a beat. Then, yes, but it won't be forever. Later that day, Helen walked into First Kentucky Bank for what felt like the 100th time in a month. Missy Sharp saw her immediately and waved her in like the place had been waiting for her. Missy pulled up the file and turned the monitor slightly. You're clean, she said. Accounts are locked, flagged. Candace and Trevor are blocked from anything tied to your name or this address. Helen nodded. Missy studied her for a moment. You all right? Helen opened her mouth to answer, then stopped. Something inside her tipped. Her knees didn't buckle, but her hands went to the edge of the desk. Not panic, not pain, just a wave of something too big to carry quietly anymore. Missy moved fast, grabbing the office chair behind her. Sit down, hun. Helen did. Slowly, carefully, like if she moved too quickly, the mask would crack. Missy poured her a cup of water and set it on the table beside her. Helen didn't touch it, she just breathed. That evening, Nora showed up with two things, a bottle of bourbon and a canvas bag filled with backup door locks. I figured we'd drink or drill, she said, maybe both. Helen managed a tight smile. You really know how to calm a girl down. They didn't talk much, just sat by the fire with the bourbon, the sound of the ice crackling filling the silence between them. You're holding up better than I expected, Nora finally said. Helen looked into the flames. That's because I stopped waiting to feel like myself. This is who I am now. The next morning, Helen made a list. She walked through the house and opened the curio cabinet, the Waterford crystal, the Haviland platter, her great-aunt's silver serving set, untouched since 2003. Each piece placed in bubble wrap and labeled for appraisal. By mid-afternoon, she had 3 boxes ready to bring to the local auction house. No announcement, no fuss, just motion. Forward, always. That night, she climbed the stairs to the attic and pulled down a plastic storage bin marked barn supplies. She carried it to the back porch, where the air was colder than it should have been. That's where she found her neighbor, Dennis Albright, standing at the fence line with a wool cap pulled low and a tool belt slung around his shoulder. You got a busted window in the west barn, he said. Thought I'd offer to help patch it before the freeze sets in. Helen blinked. That would be... Don't mention it, he interrupted. Figured you've got enough on your plate. Helen smiled, just barely. I'll cover your time. Dennis shook his head. Already covered. My wife's still talking about that bourbon pecan pie you brought over last Christmas. Call this interest. At midnight, Helen sat back down at the kitchen table. The foreclosure letter was still unopened beside her. She picked it up, held it, then tore it straight through the seal and slid it into the fireplace. The flames curled fast around the edges, bright and unforgiving. Her phone buzzed once. Grayson Bell. Candace was served the injunction notice tonight. She has 72 hours to respond before the court takes default action. Helen set her phone down, eyes fixed on the fire. It was a rare, warm spell for March. The frost had finally broken, and the smell of wet earth drifted through the open windows of Helen's kitchen. She was sorting silver, polishing what she planned to keep, boxing the rest. The radio hummed soft classical from the corner. For the first time in weeks, the house felt still, not empty, but deliberate. Then came the knock, not a pounding, not the sharp, arrogant rap she'd come to associate with Trevor, just a gentle tap, 3 times. Helen froze, cloth in hand, then stood and walked to the front door. She didn't peek through the curtain. She simply opened it. Candace stood there, pale and thin in a wool coat, too expensive for the season. Her makeup was smudged like she hadn't slept. Her hair was tied in a low knot that looked accidental. Helen didn't step aside. Candace's voice was hoarse. "Can I come in?" Helen didn't speak, just looked at her, measured her. "Please," Candace added, quieter now. "Just 5 minutes." Helen nodded once and stepped aside. Candace moved slowly through the foyer like she didn't know the way anymore. Her heels tapped lightly against the hardwood, each step uncertain. She stopped in the living room, turning to face her mother. "I didn't know," she said. Helen crossed her arms. "Didn't know what?" "That Trevor filed all that, the mortgage, the money transfers, the second loan. He never told me." Helen walked to the fireplace and opened the folder she'd left on the mantel, flipping it open with the coolness of someone rehearsed. She pulled out a single sheet and held it up. "You signed this." Her tone wasn't angry, just precise. Candace stepped forward, eyes scanning the page. Her mouth opened and closed again. He told me it was just a design authorization for his business proposal. He said we needed my name so he could pitch the remodel." Helen didn't respond. Candace let out a shaky breath. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." Helen lowered the page. "Intentions don't clean up messes. Actions do." Candace's face crumpled. "I've lost everything," she whispered. "Trevor left town. His business partner called this morning, said there's a warrant out for him. He took our joint savings, emptied the account." Helen raised her eyebrows slightly. "Your account? Must have been a shock." Candace sank into the same armchair she used to curl up in as a child. She looked nothing like that child now. "I didn't know how far he went," she said, "but I didn't stop him either. I thought we were building something together." "You were," Helen said. "Out of stolen brick and wet lies." Candace blinked back tears, but they slipped free anyway. She didn't wipe them. "I'm sorry, Mom." The words sat there, fragile, too late. Then, another knock. This one, firm. Helen moved to the door and opened it. Grayson stood there, folders tucked under one arm. "Am I early?" Helen stepped back to let him in. "Right on time." Candace flinched when she saw him. Grayson didn't soften. "We just got confirmation from the court. The civil suit has been formally filed. You'll receive your copy by mail." Candace's shoulders slumped, as though the words landed like bricks in her lap. "What does that mean?" she asked, already knowing. "It means," Grayson said, pulling a document from his folder, "that you're being held responsible for your role in the financial fraud, intentional or not." Helen said nothing. Grayson placed the paper on the side table and turned to Helen. "The foreclosure process has been officially paused. The fraud status is under formal review." Helen's breath caught, but she didn't let it show. Candace looked at her mother, face blotchy and broken. "Please," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can we fix this?" Helen studied her for a long moment. Then she reached into the folder, pulled out one last paper, and handed it over. It was a notarized list of every transaction Candace had signed off on, every approval, every shared document. "Start here," Helen said, "and bring a lawyer." Candace stared at the page, the weight of it, the finality. Then she looked up and saw something behind her mother's eyes she hadn't seen in years. A locked door, It was just after 7 when Helen stepped onto the back porch, coffee mug in hand, and watched the mist lift from the trees. The barn stood dark, quiet, sealed up for spring. Dennis had finished weatherproofing it the day before. She'd slipped him an envelope with a thank you note and a pie recipe. She sipped slowly, the ceramic warm against her palms. Then, with a quiet satisfaction, she pulled her phone from her cardigan pocket and opened the email from Grayson. Subject: Filing confirmed. Elder Protection Act, title correction petition. The attached PDF glowed bright beneath the clouded sky. She'd read it 5 times already, memorized it even. She took one last sip, then walked back inside. By 10 a.m., Candace was back, this time in yoga pants and a sweatshirt that still had the tags attached. No makeup, just tired eyes and chipped pink polish on her thumbs. "I thought we were working toward something," she said without a hello. Helen didn't respond. She led her to the dining room and slid a sheet of paper across the table. Candace stared down at it. "What is this?" Helen sat opposite her, calm, straight-backed. "It's a petition under Kentucky's elder protection statutes, title correction, abuse of trust, fraud, coercion, misrepresentation." Candace blinked. "You're using elder abuse law against me?" Helen folded her hands neatly. "I'm using the legal mechanisms available to people who are taken advantage of by those closest to them." Candace's face turned red, then white. "That's not what this was." "It is now," Helen said. "The court agrees. I filed last week. You'll be removed from the deed within 2 to 3 weeks, sooner if you don't contest it." "But I already signed off on the restitution," Grayson said. "You're still part of the fraud," Helen interrupted. "You helped Trevor open doors. You signed papers. You didn't stop him when you could have. That makes you liable. That makes you a threat." Candace's hands clenched into fists. "You'd really take everything from me?" Helen didn't flinch. "You tried to take my house. What exactly do you think this is?" For a moment, Candace looked like she might yell. Instead, she stood, fast. The chair legs screeched against the hardwood. "You've made your point," she said, loud and clear. Helen remained seated. "Then you can see yourself out." Nora arrived 20 minutes later with iced tea and a bag of groceries that Helen hadn't asked for but would use anyway. "She take the news well?" Nora asked, unloading celery and smoked Gouda into the fridge. "She took it," Helen said. Nora walked to the hutch in the corner and looked through the glass. The Easter china, creamy porcelain rimmed in gold, sat behind a thin line of bubble wrap, waiting for no one. "You ever going to bring this out again?" Nora asked. Helen joined her. "Maybe, but I don't need to see it every day to remember what it means." Nora nodded. "That's probably the sanest thing you've said since this whole mess started." Then, quietly, she pulled Helen into a long, wordless hug. There was no need for anything else. Later that week, Helen's phone rang while she was labeling boxes for the auction house. A local number. She nearly ignored it, but something made her answer. "Ms. Duval," the voice said, young and eager. "This is Lily Jenkins from the Commonwealth Courier. I'm working on a story about elder fraud cases in Kentucky, and your name came up during court records research. I was wondering if you'd be willing to talk, off or on the record." Helen hesitated. "Why me?" "You fought back," Lily said. "Most don't." Helen didn't commit, but she didn't hang up either. "I'll consider it," she said. "Call me next week." The next morning, Helen opened her laptop and logged into the shell company Grayson had helped her form 2 months ago, Maple and Laurel, LLC. They owned one property, purchased anonymously through a third-party broker 2 days after the fraud injunction was filed. A commercial space, 2 stories, prime location, just outside Lexington. The showroom. Trevor's showroom. Helen clicked the final confirmation. Lease termination, approved. Tenants notified by mail. Closure effective end of month. No extensions, no notice. She leaned back in her chair and stared at the screen. Then she whispered to herself, not cruelly, not triumphantly, just with the kind of peace that comes from justice earned. "Not your empire. Not anymore." Trevor Wills's name disappeared from the firm's website just after midnight. No statement, no scandalized press release, just a quiet vanishing. his photo pulled, bio scrubbed, inbox rerouted. Helen didn't gloat. She simply bookmarked the cash version for her records. By noon, word had spread beyond Lexington. Subcontractors who had waited months for payment were now filing claims. The showroom closure had been chalked up to lease restructuring, but everyone in their small design world knew better. Trevor had made enemies as easily as he'd made promises, and now no one returned his calls. Helen sat on the porch swing that afternoon, the late sun catching the gold ring she still wore on her right hand. Not James's wedding band, not anymore, just a circle of memory. Across from her, Nora rocked in the matching chair, sipping sweet tea from a tumbler shaped like a mason jar but made of glass. "Candace left town," Nora said, like she was reading a grocery list. Helen nodded once. "Montana," Nora added. "A friend of my niece runs a relocation agency, said she booked it under her maiden name." "Sounds about right," Helen said. "She always liked a reinvention." Nora set her glass down. "You want me to be angry for you?" Helen shook her head. "I think we're past that now." They sat in silence. The porch smelled faintly of honeysuckle and clean wood. A cardinal chirped from the oak near the driveway. Then Helen's phone buzzed once. She didn't flinch, just picked it up. Grayson Bell. "Finalized. Title correction complete. House is yours. Entirely." Helen stared at the screen. She didn't cry, didn't gasp, just breathed deep, through her chest, down to her fingertips, until it settled in her bones. "Was that him?" Nora asked. Helen nodded. "It's done." Nora didn't cheer. She just reached over and rested a hand over Helen's. "You did what most people don't." "I didn't have a choice," Helen said. "They came for the only place I've ever belonged." She paused, then added quietly, "And they lost." At First Kentucky Bank, the marble floor gleamed like it had been freshly waxed. Helen didn't linger, just approached the counter with steady steps. Missy was already waiting. "Got the final confirmation," she said, sliding a folder across the desk. "Every account secured, every dollar recovered." Helen flipped through the papers. Neat rows, balanced totals. Her name, only hers. Missy smiled. "The bank's grateful for your cooperation, Helen. Most folks crumble in this kind of thing. You made it easy to do right by you." "I've had practice," Helen said. "Cleaning up messes." Missy pulled out a white bakery box from behind the desk. "Cupcakes? Red velvet? No nuts. Don't say I never gave you anything." Helen accepted them with a genuine smile. "Word around town," Missy added, lowering her voice, "is that Candace didn't even stop to say goodbye, packed up her Audi and left in the middle of the night. No forwarding address, no apology." "She said it already," Helen said. "Just didn't mean it." Missy leaned across the counter. "You know what I think?" Helen raised a brow. "I think she never really understood what this house meant to you, not until she tried to own it." Helen thought about that all the way home. That evening, she walked the perimeter of the property alone, past the hydrangeas that had survived 4 frost cycles, past the barn Dennis had helped seal, past the willow tree where James had proposed 41 years ago. When she stepped back inside, the house smelled like lemon oil and something sweet. She took the cupcakes to the kitchen, unboxed them neatly, and placed one on a china plate from the Easter set, the one she hadn't used since it almost became someone else's centerpiece. The porcelain glowed softly in the light. She sat at the table and ate it slowly. Outside, the porch light clicked on automatically. No cars passed, no knocks came, and for the first time in months there was no message, no summons, no apology, just quiet, just her. Just home. Helen opened the linen drawer just after dawn. The air still held that sleepy, early spring chill, but inside the house, everything was warm, quiet, golden, grounded. She unfolded the embroidered napkins one by one, starched, cream-colored, with pale pink stitching at the corners. Her mother's initials were still visible on the older ones. The silver had been polished the night before, each fork aligned perfectly with its mate, each plate, Easter china, placed with reverence, not nostalgia. No one told her to do it this way, no one dared tell her not to. She finished setting the table by 9 a.m. There were 6 places, enough for comfort, enough for witnesses, By 11, the house smelled of baked ham and rosemary, roasted just right in her grandmother's ceramic pan, and a lemon meringue pie cooling gently on the counter. The doorbell rang only once. It was Nora first, balancing a tray of deviled eggs and a vase of tulips. "They had one left," she said, setting the flowers down in the center of the table. "Wasn't going to let a plastic centerpiece ruin your day." Helen smiled. "You know me too well." The neighbors came next, Dennis and his wife, his adult son, and daughter-in-law, bringing cornbread muffins and a bottle of wine someone had clearly regifted but now felt exactly right. Helen didn't remember laughing this much last year, or the year before that. They ate in a slow rhythm, no speeches, no toasts, just the sound of old stories and warm forks scraping delicate porcelain. Halfway through dessert, Missy Sharp showed up with store-bought cookies and a tiny envelope. "Dropped this off on my way," she said. "Thought you might want to see it." Inside was a simple thank you card, no signature, just the words, "In honor of your strength and your silence. Donation made to the Kentucky Elder Legal Defense Fund, from the girl who used to play under your table." Helen closed the card and set it gently on the hutch beside the china cabinet. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. By late afternoon, the guests had gone. Nora stayed behind, helping fold napkins and wrap leftovers. "Think you'll do this again next year?" she asked, drying the last wineglass. Helen glanced toward the table. The tulips still stood tall. The china gleamed like it had waited years to be seen again. "Next year's a long way off," Helen said. "But maybe." Nora pulled her into a quick hug. "You did it, you know." Helen stepped back. "Number I just finished it." That evening, when the sky turned the color of a bruise healing, Helen slipped on her gardening shoes and walked out to the yard. The grass was soft beneath her soles, damp, fragrant, honest. She knelt by the early iris shoots, brushing dirt away with her fingertips, feeling the quiet pulse of the earth return to its own rhythm. No documents, no emails, no signatures to forge or fight over, just her and the land that had never left her. The wind stirred slightly as she stood. She looked back at the house. The porch light was off. The windows glowed. She thought just for a second about that first moment, months ago, when Candace had handed her a stack of pastel paper plates and called it casual. Helen had smiled then, but her hand had clenched the rim of her china cup like it was the last piece of herself she refused to give away. Now? Now she had everything. The house, the peace, the name on the deed, the rhythm of her breath. She turned back to the garden path, feeling the soil shift gently beneath her. And just before heading inside, she murmured to the air, dry, level, unbothered, "Next time she can keep the paper plate. I kept everything else."